I'm Christy Byrne Yates, a team member at AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. My co-host Marianne Shuko is away today, but we'll see her at our next Books and Chit Chat. Marianne is a founder and manager at AlzAuthors and the author of Blue Hydrangeas, an Alzheimer's love story. And I'm the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. I'd like to introduce some of our members of our AlzAuthors team who are with us today. We are also joined by Malika Moore of Aging and Amazing. Hi, Malika. And Aging and Amazing is a wonderful organization that values healthy aging and caregiving. One side of their organization focuses on care management. The other side of the organization focuses on their signature online community. Within this online community, over 200 members from around the world share their stories, resources, and tips to help support caregivers and those who are aging. Check out their online community to learn more. We're all aging and amazing. And today we have with us, I can see, Vicki Tapia, a founder and management team member of AlzAuthors. Vicki is the author of Somebody Stole My Iron, as well as several other wonderful books. Thank you, Vicki, for being here. We also have Ruth Stevens, who is a member of our management team and an author of Stage 7, and she was a book club author, but she is also part of our management team and does acquisitions. Hi, Ruth. Nice to have you. And Ruth, I'm going to forget the name of the book, but I have it because you just published another wonderful book. Can you tell us about that? She's racing out to get it so we can see her cover, but she's a playwright and author, and so she did Stage 7. And Ruth, can you just shout out your new book?
Yes, my new book is called My Year of Casual Acquaintances.
Right.
Yeah. So
fabulous.
It's a little lighter.
But we're so happy that you got that out as well. And let's see. So, and we have Daisy is here from Aging and Amazing. Hi, Daisy. Thank you for being here. A little bit of housekeeping. This event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel and our podcast, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. And you can listen to the podcast on all the major podcast sites like Apple and Spotify. You'll find it on our website at AlzAuthors.com. If you want to know when the replay becomes available, check your email. The announcement will be made in our weekly newsletter, and if you don't see it, please check your spam or email us at alzauthors@gmail.com. If we don't have you on our mailing list, you may sign up for our newsletter at authors.com or watch for notification of the release of the podcast and the YouTube video on the book club channel in the Aging and Amazing community. If you don't wish to be seen in the video, please turn off your camera. That's fine. All participants are muted. If you'd like to speak or ask a question, please raise your hand and leave a message in the chat box if you'd like to do that instead. I think we're ready, so I want to introduce our author, Marita Golden, who is an accomplished author and has written a wonderful book around Alzheimer's called The Wide Circumference of Love, which we're going to talk about. But you've also written many other books, and you are a president emeritus of the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation, and co-founder, and I think that's quite amazing, and I am really honored to have you here. You're a veteran teacher of writing and an acclaimed award-winning author of over a dozen works of fiction and nonfiction. So there's so much more here, but I just want to say welcome and have you start and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as a writer, and also how you came to write A Wide Circumference of Love.
Well, to talk about my journey as a writer, this year, back in February, I published actually my 22nd book.
Oh my goodness.
Which is a literary memoir called How to Become a Black Writer, Creating and Honoring Black Stories That Matter. And it sort of starts with my childhood in Washington, D.C., where my father told me bedtime stories about people like Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass. And he became kind of my first writing teacher, because hearing those stories every night, I learned what a really good story was. And then my mother, watching me read everything as a child, being very curious and writing everything, poetry, She told me when I was about 12 that one day I was going to write a book. So I grew up in this home with parents who recognized my talents and nurtured those talents. And I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s, which was a great time for a lot of Americans who had previously been marginalized. And so that I grew up at that period, young, gifted, and Black. And I was mentored by people like Nikki Giovanni and Audre Lorde. I wrote for Essence Magazine. And then after living in Nigeria for a couple of years with my first husband, it turned out that my very first book was a book called Migrations of the Heart, which is about coming of age in the 60s, living in Africa, coming back to the States. And then I went on to write many books and teach in the MFA creative writing programs at George Mason University, Virginia Commonwealth University, and Johns Hopkins. And literary activism was very important to me, which is why I co-founded the Hurston Wright Foundation, which celebrates its 35th anniversary this year. And we spent 35 years presenting programs, training, workshops for Black writers from all over the world, as well as presenting honors in a big fall program every year. So I've been busy.
Yes. I am I'm in awe, and I think it's fantastic, and I think you have such an experience, and I wow, that's incredible. So thank you for all of that. And you speak to being nurtured as a parent, seeing your talent and nurturing that. And it sounds like you were in a reading home and a writing home, and that's really important as well. So I think that's really critical. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the well, I want to read a quote from the blog that you wrote for AlzAuthors when you first came into our family, and I found this so poignant. So you said, quote, "Sometimes as a writer, you get called, summoned to dive in, to plunge into the terrifying beauty of a completely unknown narrative landscape. When you report for duty, that is when you know you are a writer." And I love that. And I wonder if you could comment on how, like, what was your evolution then? You talked about becoming a writer. What, like, what was that calling? And I know you gave us your background and you started writing in the 60s and 70s, which was just such a vibrant time and so necessary. And Marita, I have to say, we're in a tough time right now. So I think writers and creators are so important right now. Voices being heard is so important. But so maybe you could speak to that calling, and whether it's about Alzheimer's or dementia or social issues. Where do you find the courage to put your
Well,
voice out there?
well, I think that a lot of us as writers are born as writers. I mean, I think that many of us have the same origin story. That is, we came into the world and we have certain personality traits. We're very curious. We have this natural obsession with stories. We naturally want to know stories. We naturally want to tell stories. We want to write stories that only we can write. Very often we've grown up in homes where either our parents or the people around us told us stories, or they were always telling stories, and we were listening to those stories. So those are the kind of ingredients that make a writer. I do think writers can be made. I think that many people may find themselves in midlife or at any point in their life wanting to write, and they can become very fine writers. But many of us do come into the world as writers. And I think that I was just one of those people. I live through stories. I see a story, in everything. And I think that, just to comment briefly about this time we're in, we've always been in a different time, a difficult time. And I think that if, Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells could be journalists, activist journalists, at a time when African Americans were enslaved or when they just come out of enslavement, we can certainly write now. And I think that writing is, I think it's really important. I don't think that writing is something that's only good for or necessary for people who want to become authors of books. There's a wonderful book that Louise DeSalvo wrote called Writing as a Way of Healing. And she really writes in the book about how writing is actually necessary for our mental health. And not writing like Tolstoy or Toni Morrison, but writing to tell our stories. And there's a wonderful quote in the book where she quotes Henry Miller, the author of many novels, which actually I could not bear, but nonetheless, he said, the more I wrote, the more I became a human being. And we know that writing does heal. It heals when you want it to heal. It heals even when you're not thinking about healing. So writing is very important. And we're not going to stop writing. I mean, in fact, this is an incredible time to tell a story. The stories that are unfolding, the pressure we're under, the choices we have to make. That's what makes a hell of a story.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. As you're talking, I also think so there's story and there's writing, and I think I really hear you when you talk about the curiosity, right? And that's so important. I was reflecting recently, my mom and dad both had dementia and passed away in 2015. But I was thinking about how much my mom was such a reader. We used to battle each other for books, like looking for things. But we were also, it was the time, I'm 62, so I was in my teens or tweens when serialized stories were on television. So like Roots and North and South and all of these stories. And I remember my mom and I might be butting heads terribly because I was just a rebel tween and teen. But we would sit down on that couch together and watch the shows. And we would be there and we would talk about it. And that's what got us talking, was we had this story that we were both riveted by and we wanted to discuss it. And I just recently saw my daughter. She's living in Ireland right now. And we both were fans of the Hunger Games novels. So a new one just came out, a prequel. And I'm telling you, there are times when my daughter and I butt heads, but we talked about those stories. We talked about the novels. We talked about the writing. We talked about all of that. So I think stories as a family glue are also really important. Our stories and stories that we read. So I think fiction is so powerful and healing. So it's great.
Yeah, I mean, stories bring us together.
Yeah.
Stories break down barriers. And, I teach both fiction and nonfiction at the University of Marita Golden, which is my online, I do write workshops and seminars, online. And when I'm often teaching, working with people on memoirs, people will feel like, oh, my family was so, I said, we were all born in the same family. That's what you realize. So that those questions of dysfunction and pain and trauma, they're universal. So literature, and I think that memoir in the right hands is literature, does definitely bring us together. We know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to monopolize this. We have other writers here, and Malika, please jump in. Yeah.
Did I journal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, not really. I'm one of those writers that pretty much, if I'm writing to create a project. And now I do journal now, intermittently, just sort of to get things on paper because I do find that helpful. But I'm not one, I mean, I know people who have 40, 50 boxes of journals that they started when they were 13 or 14. But I do think that journaling can be helpful. And I use it sometimes.
Great. Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah. Marita, I read The Wide Circumference of Love several years ago. So, and I remember how much I loved it.
Yeah,
But I had to go back to read the review I posted, back then,
sure. That's
because my
2017.
recall after about 3 weeks with a book now is definitely slipping. But what I said was that the writing was just gorgeous. And
Thank you.
so I know you said you were kind of born into it and nurtured throughout your life of telling stories and writing stories. Did you also eventually study creative writing? Because I mean, your writing was just so pitch perfect and so well crafted. And I know I'm being effusive here, but it's how I felt about it.
Well, I took some writing classes when I was living in New York in the 70s
Mhm.
at the New School
Oh,
for Social Research and at NYU. That was the extent. Um, the formal training of writers through MA and MFA programs is a product of the late 80s.
hmm.
And so that I only had one or two writing classes, and then I just learned to write by reading and by writing and writing and writing and working with editors.
Mhm.
So that now, people can go and get a master's, a MFA, and we think of people like, you know, Zora Neale Hurston and Hemingway and all. There were no classes. I mean, they
Right.
they learn to write by reading and by studying and really putting in the hours to craft. When I was younger and I was teaching at universities, I would often have fix my teaching schedule so that I would have 2 or 3 days where I'd have extended hours to write. Um, but now when I'm working on a project, I will usually write 1 hour a day, usually about 4 or 5 days a week. And I find that that hour is very productive. I go into it very relaxed. Oh, what's going to happen? What am I going to write? A lot of the tension and stress that I used to feel, I don't feel anymore. I'm just on an adventure. What are these 250 words? Where are they going to lead me? And then I stop and I'll pick up the next day. And I find that for me at this point in my life, that 1 hour is extremely productive and satisfying.
Great.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you.
I do want to talk a little bit about your book, and maybe you can tell us a little bit for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, what the story involves and what we can take away as those of us who may still be caring for someone with dementia, what we can learn from your story.
Well, this is a book, as I said earlier, I was not a caregiver for someone with dementia
Hmm.
or Alzheimer's. My cousin's mother had it. And as I was doing the research, um, visiting her was not just research, it was soulful connection. And I had actually done about 100 pages of another book, and I hit a wall where I just felt like, ugh, this is going nowhere. Um, because if you're going to write a novel, you have to feel a lot of different things. You have to feel excitement, um, curiosity, and you have to feel like you're ready for the long haul. That is, however long this takes, I'm in it. And I wasn't feeling that about this particular story. And so after 100 pages, I put it aside. And I really thought, I was through. I said, oh, I'll never write another novel. Well, a couple of weeks later, those characters came to me in the story that became The Wide Circumference of Love. And initially, I said, why am I writing about Alzheimer's? Well, for the same reason that I've written my other novels that were not in any way autobiographical. I was writing about Alzheimer's because I am spiritually available for difficult subjects. And so writing about Alzheimer's was no different than writing about the story of a police officer who kills a young man during a police stop and commits murder, which was a novel I wrote called After. So I found myself writing the story, and pretty early in the writing, I knew that I wanted it to be a love story, essentially, that Alzheimer's was the way in to write about a marriage and a family. And I was very lucky. I simply Googled Alzheimer's, and I found a woman who worked with families who were caring for loved ones, and she opened the door very wide for me. She answered all my questions. She introduced me to the executive director of a memory care unit in Greenbelt, Maryland. The woman there was super excited that I was writing the book. She said, you can hang out as long as you want, as much as you want. I met people, family members in the support group, and they were very open and willing to talk to me. And so about halfway through, I realized that I had thought this story was going to be deeply, deeply depressing. And the more certain kinds of families I talked to, the more I found that there was often a very inspiring spiritual piece to it that I had not anticipated. And so that deepened the story for me. So then I wrote the novel, and it's a story of a 35-year marriage and how the husband develops Alzheimer's and how that changes everything, the relationship with children, relationship with the wife. And then I thought when I finished the novel, well, I'm through with this. But then in my research, I had come upon a statistic that back then in 2013 was not as widely circulated as it is now. And that is that African Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's as whites. And I found that fascinating, particularly because when I would be talking to people who should have known that, they were surprised. So I ended up writing a major journalistic piece for the Washington Post about why African Americans get it. And it's a genetic thing. The gene that creates Alzheimer's is different in African Americans, as well as societal influence as well. So I said, okay, I'm through. But then, then I got involved with the organization Us Against Alzheimer's. And I was so impressed with the work that they do that I then wanted to support them by doing this anthology, which was kind of like a fundraiser for the organization, where people who were caregivers, either published writers or not published writers, wrote about the experience. So for about 5 or 6 years of my life, I was really doing a lot of writing about Alzheimer's. And I'm going to be working with the African American Alzheimer's group in Montgomery County in June at their event. But that's the long story.
That's so huge. And actually, last month's book club that we did was with Deborah Tan, who writes about the race of dementia. And she talks not only about the race for a cure, but also the very real point that you've just raised, is that in the African American community and communities of color, Alzheimer's, dementia, all kinds of dementia are at higher rates. And some of it is, like you said, societal. It might be the medical community's response to certain things. So I think it's so critical that you raise that issue and that we talk about it. And so really happy to have that here on AlzAuthors, and love your second book there, Us Against Alzheimer's. We do have that as part of the AlzAuthors library as well, so people can find it there. I'm going to jump to Ruth, who has a question.
Yeah, my question, Marita, is since you wrote the book and published it several years ago, do you feel that from then to now that the conversation has changed much in terms of, general public perceptions and awareness and has the conversation changed about Alzheimer's, do you think?
Well, yes, yes and no. I think that one of the areas that I particularly when I started doing when I did the article for the Washington Post, I was concerned was clinical trials for a treatment. And we're still it's predicted that within the next 5 years, 40% of the people who have Alzheimer's in America will be people of color.
Wow.
And yet the medical research field has not done as robust a job of enlisting people of color, and particularly Black people, in clinical trials. And that's very disheartening because the models for outreach to the Black community have been established. They're tried, they're true, and they work. But there is just still resistance, some of it based in negative stereotypes about African Americans that limit the participation of African Americans in the drug trials when it should not be that hard to get us in those trials. And we are now at a point where NIH has been decimated, and that bodes very ill for continued development of drugs. Medicaid, Medicare services are being disrupted. So we're entering a dark period after a period of, I do think, several years. I mean, for example, you used to see advertised. I don't see as many advertisements on TV as I used to see about Alzheimer's. There was a period where a couple of years ago, I said, oh my God, they're finally advertising about Alzheimer's, and not just to promote a drug, but about Alzheimer's as a reality. And I don't see those advertisements anymore. It's just like they were there, then they're gone. And now with this dismantlement of the fabric of our bureaucracy, we're entering a really, really dark period. But it's a period that means that you have to keep fighting to hold on to what we have had, and even try to grow it. I mean, I keep looking at this period and wondering, what are the new institutions? What are the new things that are going to be coming out of a period like this? The Chinese symbol for crisis is the same symbol for opportunity. And so we're just going to have to keep fighting.
Yeah, it does feel like we could despair, or we could change our outlook, and again, like you said, the crisis opportunity is pretty poignant. Yeah, absolutely. Want to make sure anybody else have something. I really appreciate what you're saying. I want to share, Malika had to leave, but she did say, this is so wonderful. Writing is on the top of my list for my next decade. I look forward to reaching out and learning more about Marita University, and she'll be watching the replay. So maybe we can take this time for you to tell us about Marita University and how we can find you other places, and what you'd like us to know.
Well, my website, maritagolden.com. I offer writing workshops, memoir, fiction. I'll do occasionally presentations on the publishing industry, self-publishing, how to find an agent. So if you go to the website, there'll be a pop-up where you can join my email list, and I send out periodic newsletters.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. This kind of feels like a place where I can invite you to share a little bit from your novel. If you could read some for us, that would be great. So if you're open to that, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. I think I'll read the from the opening. Okay. Yeah, I'll read 2 pages from the opening.
Thank you.
Chapter 1, September 15th, 2015. The footsteps echoed all night long, her husband wandering through the terrain of the house they'd shared for 35 years, a house that for him no longer held memories, a house that he no longer recognized as home. Locked in the bedroom they once shared, Diane Tate lay in the dark, listening to the stuttering dance of footsteps that revealed the path of her husband's halting circumnavigation. Even at 62, she still possessed a young mother's ears, once able to hear 3 rooms away, a quarter mile in the distance, or among the voices of a dozen others for the singular cry of her children, Lauren and Sean. Now, with the same instinctive precision, she heard Gregory anywhere in the house. Silence was the fear now, for if Gregory was not beside her or near her, then he might be gone. Midnight. His feet hit the hardwood mahogany floor in the den where he now slept. 12:45. A muffled stomping shook the carpeted floorboards of the living room, its side tables and mantel crowded with photos of the children Diane had borne and they'd raised, faces imprinted with Gregory's high forehead and strong jaw. 1 o'clock. She heard the light-hearted jingle of the small bell attached to the front door as Gregory tried to leave the house. Punching in the 4-digit security code to impose a preventive lockdown was Diane's final nightly ritual, begun months earlier, when her slumber was severed by a flood of premonition. A throbbing, cataclysmic knowledge had roused her, and she'd run downstairs, opened the front door, and raced barefoot in her nightgown beneath a still dark early morning April sky to find Gregory, his pajama hat clad frame rounding a nearby corner. Now Diane tossed aside the lightweight thermal blanket and prepared to get out of bed when she heard the bell stop its tinny vibrations. The silence that followed was interminable until finally there was the sound of Gregory's defeated footsteps heading away from the door. Diane granted herself a reprieve and slid back beneath the sheet and blankets. She surrendered to the embrace of the bed that was hiding place and refuge. Yet sleep was impossible in the early morning that raced toward dawn. 2:45, the oven door slammed shut. Each evening before she went to bed, she unplugged the microwave and the stove. Sharp knives were locked away in a drawer to which only she had the key, an action taken the day she found Gregory shaving with a paring knife, oblivious to the blood trickling down his neck. 3:30, the gurgling, boisterous flush of the toilet down the hall echoed. This did not mean that Gregory had used the toilet. 4 o'clock, the leather-slippered feet padded back to the den. She imagined rather than heard Gregory lay down. Half an hour later, sleep now firmly out of her grasp, she rose from her bed and walked barefoot down the stairs, past an array of photographs, their wedding in the sanctuary of Metropolitan AME Church. Lauren, back then bespectacled and toothy in her Girl Scout uniform. Sean at his high school graduation in black robes, his 18-year-old smile, self-effacing and unsure, arms hugging Gregory's and Diane's shoulders. The framed Washington Post article about Gregory and his partner Mercer standing before their award-winning signature building, the city's main library, only 8 blocks from the White House. Gregory kissing Diane at the conclusion of her installation as a judge for the Family Court Division of the D.C. Superior Court. The photos trailed to the den where Diane opened the door and saw Gregory finally asleep, swathed in a wrinkled checkered shirt and khakis, an outfit he had insisted on wearing every day for the past week.
Wow, that's yeah, that hits home, and that really, I think, captures so much in there. I think that just from the beginning, what you say about the hearing, the hearing of a mother, it never really goes away, and here she is again,
And
listening.
well, I wanted to write about a caregiver. I wanted specifically to write about the caregiving experience and how it changes a marriage and everything. And one of my closest friends was is a therapist. And she had a show on a local radio station here in Washington, D.C. called Mind Talk, where she, gave therapeutic advice and everything. And she just went through 2 very, very difficult years with her husband who had vascular dementia. And vascular dementia is the devil of dementias. It's horrible. And she, at the time that she was going through this, was also keeping a journal because she decided that she wanted to write about what she was going through for other people. And I do think that, and she asked me in my capacity, as someone who works with people on books, to look at the journal. And as I was reading it, it dawned on me that as hard as that journey was with her husband, and it was hard, the fact that she had this journal that she wanted to write and that she did write, and that she had a higher purpose. Of course, the purpose of being present for a loved one as they are essentially declining and dying is very high. But the purpose of taking that experience and distilling it into something to be shared with others is also a very, very high purpose. And I do think that the fact that she had that gave her emotional strength that allowed her to keep showing up, that she was making something out of this very difficult time.
Yeah, and I'll ask some of our other authors here, Vicky or Ruth, to weigh in. But I know for me, journaling was very much a piece of what helped me. Sometimes sometimes my journaling was my prayer. It was like I wrote letters to God, and I was like, and I go back and I read them. I can't read them anymore, but I would just write my heart out about how I was feeling, and even asking God to, God, take care of these 5 people who are making me crazy right now, okay? Because I can't deal with them. But it was also noting that this is what happened and this is what was going on. But we hear from a lot of our authors that a journal was the beginning of their book. So I don't know, Vicky, could you weigh in on that? I think Marita's sharing something really important here.
Well, when I started I started journaling when I was 16, so long history of journaling. I don't have 40 books in a box, but I have a drawer full, if that counts. And I use journaling as a way to cope with life. I think writing it down settled me, and it also would keep me going moving forward. So when my parents were both affected by my mom with vascular dementia, my dad with Parkinson's related dementia, it was sort of an escape for me to come home from the facility where they both resided and come home and be able to just write things down. The things my mom would say would just blow the top off your head. And I just wanted to keep track of everything. And that was one way I could do it, was come home onto my keyboard. After doing this for about a year, I thought, by golly, I think I'm writing a book. So it kind of came in the back door. And yeah, that's how it worked for me.
Yeah.
It was a respite for me to be able to write things down. And I was amazed at the things I remembered from several years prior. It just must have made such an impression on me at the time. I didn't know I even was going to remember these things.
Yeah, and I think that once you start writing about your life, it is amazing the things you can remember.
Yeah.
The crucial turning point things,
Mhm.
the most important things that shaped you.
Yeah,
You
Marita,
do
I still remember. I
Yeah.
remember them today. I mean, I can think back to, oh my gosh, I could have gone that way and I went that way. Why didn't I go that way?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vicky. Ruth?
My experience was different. I was journaling as a girl, probably through high school, typical kind of dear diary stuff.
Mhm, mhm,
But then I stopped doing that, and I had a career in public relations and to a lesser degree advertising. And so I was writing all the time for my work. And the last thing I wanted to do at the end of the day or in the weekend was to write, So I didn't. I didn't write anything, except work stuff for years and years, and until I finally quit my day job, so to speak. And at the point that that happened, my mother had died a couple of years prior to that of Alzheimer's, and I wanted to write something about it, but not a memoir. So I wrote a stage play because I loved theater and I felt comfortable, like a book seemed too intimidating to do a whole novel. So I wrote a stage play called Stage Seven, and it was produced in community theater. And it was really exciting. It was a wonderful, if you think it's great to have people read your book, it's even better when there's a live audience out there hearing what you've written.
mhm.
Um, but afterwards, I realized how hard it is to get a play produced anywhere. I had beginner's luck, but but that was it. So I decided to turn Stage Seven into a novel and to try to cast a wider net. So I kind of fell into the writing that way, um, but not through journaling. And the book is based on my, its experience with my mother. It's inspired by true events, as they say, but it's a work of fiction.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Um, I can recall a number of our authors talking about sometimes their journaling started as just taking notes for the doctor, and then it became, so it was more like a litany of this, almost reading not so eloquently, but what you just read to us, like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and as a way to kind of see where they were going, and then it became more. So I think that it is, for anyone out there who's listening, who's a caregiver, I think journaling can be very helpful, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just getting it out of you. It's rattling around in your head, and to get it out on a piece of paper can sometimes be incredibly therapeutic. I don't know. Well, what are your thoughts on that, Marita? But that's sort of how I
Yeah,
felt.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
Um, anyway, I appreciate you reading so much. That was just really great, and gave us a taste of what you're doing there. And what's next for you? What are you working on now?
Well, as I said, my new book, How to Become a Black Writer,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's a book about writing, but it's also a book about a little girl who grew up and all of her dreams came true.
Uh-huh.
So that it's a book for anybody who wants just to read a great story. There's social history because writers aren't just made by writing, they're made by the times that they grow up in. And so I've been doing a lot of promotion of that.
Well,
And I'm working with a group of women in memoir, a year-long memoir workshop. So that's what I've been doing,
that,
promoting that book, yeah. And that book is on Amazon. It's on my website as well. And so it's like how I became a writer. And once you see how I became a writer, this is how you can become a writer.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your response to, it might have been a question from Malika about becoming a writer. And I think, you've said a couple times writers sometimes are born and then develop, but, and you've referenced how, Hemingway and some of these great authors, they didn't go to MFA programs. They weren't like, doesn't have to be that academic. And I think that that's inspiring for people to know too, that you may have this in your heart. I have one last writer question for you, and that is, I find I love writing and have always done a lot of writing. Boy, being edited though,
Actually,
help me out on that.
yeah. I mean, it's both And because what I find is that a good editor always enhances the book and sees things that I didn't see. And I view my relationship with the editor as indispensable. And actually, usually when I'm working on a project, I'll have one or two people who are reading. Um, I'll give them, will you read these 100 pages? Or will you read
Yeah.
these 100 pages? And I really find that dialoguing and conversing about the book is very important. Now, is it not when you give your editor this manuscript and they no, getting that back is not fun. But once you've gotten over the and you settle down and you say, well, she's right here.
Yeah.
I can do this. Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever have to fight for something with an editor that you wanted and they were pushing, or was it usually
Yeah.
like they were, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, and usually a good editor will, they're not, I've never had an editor say, Marita, you can't do that.
Right.
And I think sometimes being questioned about an aspect of your work is good.
Yeah.
Because then you have to defend it. You have to explain to them and to yourself why you're doing that. So I think being challenged, there's nothing wrong with being challenged. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is it's a humbling process, and it's also a good process because you're in your head and you're writing and but you're not receiving it the same way someone else is,
Yeah.
the way the reader is. So it's so important.
I mean, and for example, I'll give you an example, the new book. In the new book, there's a point when I'm writing about my goals as a writer and my life as a writer. And I said that I was ambitious. And so a person, actually a woman who was my first editor, my very first editor, and who I regard as a mentor, said, well, you don't want to say you were ambitious. People might take that the wrong way. So I said, so I thought about that. And I was very surprised that this person said that. But you know what? When I thought about it, I said, you know what? I'm going to use it, but I'm going to say even more. So I wrote, I was ambitious. This is not what it says in the book because I can't remember, but I said something like, I was ambitious. You don't create an institution like Hurston Wright. You don't write 22 books without being ambitious. And then I put in italics, ambitious, a word that women aren't supposed to use. Ambitious, a word that Black women are afraid to use because it makes people upset. So she didn't want me to use it, so I used the hell out of it. So
I love that.
She actually improved the use of the word.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great. It's so funny that you say that because I just listened to a podcast that Julia Louis-Dreyfus does, and she just did it
You
with,
mean Wiser Than Me?
yes.
Oh, I love that podcast.
Okay, well, I just listened to the one she did with Carol Burnett, and they talk about this very thing about ambition and about how women are not supposed to say ambitious. And they both agree that's crap because I don't know, are we allowed to say that on this podcast? Anyway, but but that it's such a shame and it holds us back because of course we have, as Carol said, fire in the belly, but it's also it's okay to be ambitious.
Yeah, and to say that you are.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, and we're still having that conversation. And this was a woman who was a groundbreaker in the publishing world. But people, we're at a point now where language is being censored and triggered, and but as a writer, my job is to be a little dangerous and to push the button. So.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Any other comments from our group here? Anybody else want to weigh in on anything? Or Marita, I'm going to give you an opportunity.
I really enjoyed, meeting everybody today, and I think this is really important. We got to roll up our sleeves and keep fighting the good fight,
Absolutely.
because it's not. I mean, Alzheimer's is not going away.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
And I think that the change is going to have to, the change is going to have to be protected and pushed through by families
Yeah,
who are really on the front lines.
yes,
I mean, like families have got to start saying to this administration, what the hell? I mean, that's the second time I've used the word hell. Okay,
that's
what the
okay.
heck? What the hell? Why are you cutting Alzheimer's?
Mm-hmm.
Make noise. And I know that it's hard to make noise when you're caregiving, but we got to get the people in the family who aren't caregiving to make that noise, because this is really dire what they're doing to NIH.
Yes, yes, it is.
I mean, firing women and African Americans who are on the groups that decide what grants will be funded,
Yeah, no,
which is
it's
illegal,
yeah, no.
which is actually illegal to
Yeah, I was
do.
just going to say it's criminal. It's criminal what's happening. Yeah, absolutely. Michelle,
So
you
yeah,
unmuted. Did you have a question or a
I
comment?
did. I've been sitting here quietly, but I first wanted to thank Ms. Golden for her outreach, and I loved listening to that passage because as a social worker, that is what we hear: the sleeplessness, the concern, the anxiety. Where are they? What can I do? What is this relationship like now? So she really captured that. So I really wanted to share that. I appreciated that. And on a personal note, when I found out she was going to be the author, I was very excited because I've read two of your earlier works and Do Remember Me and Long Distance Life. And
that's
I
that's
thoroughly
going way far.
Yeah.
You got on
Oh, yeah.
you got on the boat early. Thank you. Thank you.
And so I actually ran down to my basement to see if I still had those two books, and one is just the dust cover, so I must have loaned it to a friend who has not returned it. But I enjoyed both of those books, and I really applaud your efforts now to address the stigma in the African American community and to create meaningful conversation around Alzheimer's and how to best attack that issue right now.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I also am grateful that we have another fiction writer to talk, because I do feel the power of story and fiction is just as educational, just as poignant, just as critical in this fight that we have around Alzheimer's and dementia and healthcare even, because, all the to-do books, all the memoirs are so important, and yet fiction is really something that can bind us together. Ruth, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, just to build on that, it is, and yet when you look at the overall body of literature on Alzheimer's and dementia, there's not that much fiction.
Yeah.
But we're seeing it more and more, on television, when the series This Is Us, which is, was so popular a few years ago.
Yeah, and that movie with Still Alice.
That was one of the first that really, brought it into the limelight. So
and
we're seeing
considering how prevalent it is, there needs to be more.
Yes.
Exactly.
Because the dimensions of the impact on caregivers and those suffering with it has just been lightly touched.
Right.
Walter Mosley did a novel about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a very tough journey, and it's not a quick journey. This is very long term for most folks. So it's a major part of our lives, and it touches all parts of the family. So I think it's really important. Thank you so much. It has been a delight to hear from you and learn from you. Really appreciate this.
Thank you for the invitation.
You bet. I'm going to end here by saying thank you so much. This episode will be posted, I believe, May 21st. So for all of you who are watching this or listening to this later, you can learn more and register for the next book club by going to AlzAuthors.com or in the Aging and Amazing Community and Books and Chit Chat channel. If you're already receiving our AlzAuthors newsletter, you will hear about upcoming book club events. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website. And lastly, I just want to say that you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much for being here. AlzAuthors is celebrating 10 years in 2025. Please help us celebrate. How, you might ask? I'm Christy Byrne Yates, and I'm an ALZ author and also the co-host of our podcast, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. Here's how you can help us celebrate this year. Visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter at AlzAuthors.com. Like and subscribe to our podcast, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Buy books from our authors. We have over 400 authors and every genre is represented. Finally, donate. It's our 10th anniversary, so consider $10 donation or $10,000, whatever works for you. Your generous donation allows us to continue to bring you wonderful authors and informative and supportive content for your dementia journey. We're a registered 501c3 organization, so your donation is tax deductible. Remember, you are not alone. Thank you for your support.